We'll talk about the power of beauty and the truth of art with historian Dr. Elizabeth Lev, author of the new book, How Catholic Art Saved the Faith. And with Gregorian chant more popular than ever on the classical charts, Father Cassian Folsom, prior of the Monks of Norcia, explains the success of their music in the CD, Benedicta. Finally, the pro-life film Unplanned was an unexpected hit this year. The film's subject, Abby Johnson, and its star, ASHLEY BRATCHER, tell us why. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
My next guest is a noted art historian teaching Baroque, Christian, and Renaissance art at Duquesne University in Rome. She's also the author of the new book, How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, The Triumph of Beauty and Truth in Counter-Reformation Art. I'm thrilled to have with us here in studio to talk about it, Dr. Elizabeth Lev. Great to see you, Liz.
Thank you so much for having me.
So nice to see you here. I'm used to seeing you in museums and catacombs. So
I'm completely out of context.
That's okay.
I'm like a painting off this wall.
But the lighting is working well. Tell me, why do you make the argument that Catholic art saved the faith? Did it need to be saved?
I think any student of the early 16th century, when we have the famous event of Martin Luther's opening of the Reformation in 1517, would say that the church and the faithful found themselves in a state of complete chaos. So you have different religions that are all presented to you between Luther, Calvin, Zwingli, and others. And what the real problem is the printing press. Think about the increase in information. So you have millions of pamphlets that are just inundating the faithful or just the society. And these pamphlets, to get people's attention, they need a very kind of catchy type of title in writing, right? So what we would call today something like clickbait.
A hook.
A hook. And so they're very polemical. So you have a situation of different religions, tons of information about all these different religions, and the faithful who, for the very first time, have to make choices. If it's been one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church forever, then today, or all of a sudden, it becomes this sea of choices. So while the tone in print is very harsh and very polemical and very antagonistic, art becomes a great way to take the focus off the conflict with each other and to start looking together at one thing. So it becomes not only didactic, but it's a great almost peacekeeper.
It unites people. What lessons do we have to learn today, and can the church learn from 500-year-old pieces of art that happened during the Counter-Reformation? Are there lessons applicable to us here?
The lessons of the 16th, 17th century art are, for the church, they're constants. Because the church is the works of art that the church commissioned in this period deal with sacraments. The teaching on the sacraments are the same. And so the representing of that teaching through art can certainly be helpful and useful today. The idea of intercession, the presence of these patron saints, guardian angels, the existence of purgatory, all this visually reinforced in the faithful. And then also the idea of how do we live out our faith in our contemporary life. It was a challenge in the 16th century, and it's a challenge in the 21st century.
Would you, I mean, as I look out at American culture today, we are a non-literate age. We are really back in some ways to the stained glass and the great images and paintings that swallowed up our forefathers. We're back there in some ways. The problem is the church producing artistic items and artistic works to draw the attention of that non-literate consumer, that non-literate former faithful?
That contemporary art issue is a very complicated one. There is a great deal of hope for contemporary art. There are a lot of great artists that are out there producing really beautiful works. Where there's a lot of willingness for artists to come to the fore, I often think the problem is patronage and public. And so while the public is illiterate today, if you will, in biblical questions, the public was not necessarily more literate in that period. So to explain this a little bit better, maybe the biblical stories were a lot more.
They knew the basic
biblical stories, and they knew the stories of the saints because they lived out the calendar in a way that obviously most people don't today. But really, when it came down to these essential questions of sacraments, I mean, that's part of what made the Reformation so powerful. No, this is not the body of Christ. Well, who's going to explain this to the faithful, and how can the faithful defend it and own that concept of the real presence? And so we have, I think, a need to create a more demanding public, a more sensitive public, and simply for more patronage. And not just, bishops have to commission more churches. No, lay people need to put religious art in the home, I think. It's part of our lives.
Yeah, and the church has also lost its taste, I hate to say, in so many ways, not only in the liturgical setting, but beyond it. Let's talk about some of the things that really work. And this book, I have to say, this book is one of the most splendid depictions because as you are introducing us to things, it really is like visiting the Lislev Museum because it's curated side by side. These pieces are put up against each other in a context. And I love that you also broaden this. It's not just painting, it's sculpture, it's architecture. And it broadens, I think, the understanding of the time and the impetus that drove these artists in that, to face the challenge they were confronting at the time. And it teaches us a lot. Let's talk about the Church of the Aizu in Rome and how this was constructed with a particular aim in mind. You've already referenced it. Tell us what they achieved there and what was the purpose.
Well, the Church of the Gesù is the very first church to be built in Rome after the Reformation, after the sack of Rome, after Rome is really, if you will, almost fallen to its knees. So we have the Jesuit order that comes into play in the 1530s. The lay people, the church, are all very excited about this group of young priests who are willing to go out and preach the faith and the truth and truth of the faith. They want to help them, and they start to fund a church. And so Cardinal Alexander Farnese, who was the wealthiest cardinal in the College of the Cardinals, will pay for the church. And what makes this construction interesting is that the Jesuits and Cardinal Farnese were not always getting along. The Jesuits are about, oh no, we want austerity, we want simplicity. And Cardinal Farnese is like, no, make it bigger, put more gold gilding in. But the beauty of it is, they work together to create a church that when you walk into the Gesù, you open up the door, which is relatively low compared to the ceiling, and you catch your breath. And one of the main things about the church is a barrel vault ceiling. So it's got a very high ceiling, and it makes something like a telescope. So your eye focuses straight down the nave. And then it was the first church to be built without a rood screen. And I know you know this, but just in case anybody doesn't, I don't mean R-U-D-E, it's R-O-O-D. It's a screen that used to be put into churches to separate lay people from the sanctuary. So they remove it. And so you walk in, the tabernacle's on the altar, there it is, the path to Jesus. And so this incredible construction, this in a certain sense battle between this religious order and this very worldly cardinal, which has such a happy ending. Because at the end of the day, Cardinal Farnese ended up with a personal conversion. He's buried in the Gesù. So I like to say he built their church for them, but they saved his soul.
They saved his soul, yeah. And it is, and today you can still see it, it's spectacular. But I love how the art and the architecture all serves the heart of why this is here and what it existed to do. And there's another story you tell so beautifully in the book, St. Charles Borromeo, which this is something I did not know. So there are a lot of hidden gems here, things we just take for granted. St. Charles Borromeo was the first, I guess, to construct confessionals in Milan. And then tell us about how this catches on and some of the beautiful examples you point out in the book.
Charles Borromeo, that multifaceted saint, archbishop, treatise on architecture, and what he's really trying to do is to apply the Council of Trent, so this 20-year council that the church has to address the problems brought out in during the Reformation.
And again, confession is under attack as a sacrament.
Confession is massively under attack. And so confession and the Eucharist are the two that are the most attacked. And so he starts thinking about how to create a confessional that, first of all, is a purpose-built space. It's not we're going to go into a back room, which helps to avoid scandals with the clergy, which are very present in this period.
Right.
So he's thinking, how do I create a situation where we don't have scandalous situations? And then something that's inviting. So here you are, there's the church, there's the confessional. Why don't I go to confession? And so he designs the confessional, which we see in Rome. I don't see them so much in the United States, but they're open on either side. So you kneel on either side, the priest goes, the confessor goes in the middle, and the screen's on.
And he's closed off on both sides.
Exactly. So it's, I mean, it's amazing all the things that came out of that period, addressing very specific practical problems in a beautiful way.
One of the things you talk about in the book, and you break it up into 3 sections: the sacraments, the intercession, and then the work of humans in salvation history. You talk about the saints, St. Mary Magdalene particularly. Why does she become such a focal point in this period? We see her in so much art. You mentioned Reni's work, Guido Reni, and others. Why did she become so important?
So I've been irritated about the portrayal of Mary Magdalene ever since the Da Vinci Code thing. So I've been sort of biding my time with this book to be able to say, no, that's not who she is.
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene is a figure who's always been in art. She's omnipresent in art. She's recognized. She has more costume changes than your average pop star. She's, one day she's the wealthy woman with the alabaster jar. She takes on a very, very fundamental role. She is the poster child for confession. She really is the image of penitence. So she goes from being, swathed in these beautiful robes holding her jar to the most dramatic person underneath in the crucifixion. Later on, she becomes the one who's weeping the most. She expresses our uncontrolled grief in a situation like that. In the Counter-Reformation era, she becomes the penitent, the woman who was beautiful, but the woman who eventually realizes all the things in this world don't matter as much as Christ. And so she makes penance look good.
Tell me for a moment about Caravaggio, one of my favorites, and you to walk into those churches and to see Caravaggio's just hanging out on the wall near the entryway of churches, uncovered, unguarded. You put a quarter in and the lights come on like a stadium, which
it's gone up now. It's more like $2 in.
Okay, $2. But still, to have that kind of light on these irreplaceable images, I still scratch my head. The conservationist in me says, can we put this behind glass and in a museum? Tell me about the Entombment, that particular work, and what Caravaggio's contribution is. He's only on the scene for what, a decade? His career, basically,
he bursts on the scene. He has a little bit of work before 1600, but he burst on the scene in 1599, which is on the eve of the Jubilee year of 1600. And it's going to be the biggest Jubilee since 1500 because the Reformation has caused problems in the middle. So the church is preparing for an estimated 3 million pilgrims. Now, this is 1600. There are no buses, no trains, no airplanes. There are going to be 3 million pilgrims. They're going to be coming through the northern gate, which is the Piazza del Popolo, and they're going to be walking around the city and looking at different parts of the city. And so they bring all these artists in. And even this Caravaggio, this kind of, he doesn't paint like Raphael. He doesn't, as a matter of fact, he never would have been successful if the Renaissance standards had continued. Caravaggio's art doesn't conform to what the other, the perspective and the other rules of painting. But when he makes these gritty images with this very powerful light, it's irresistible. So who notices him right after the Pope? The Oratorians. This amazing congregation founded by Philip Neri, who understand that faith is also delightful. So they give us music and oratory, and they want to give us paintings. And they commission this problematic in and out of jail artist.
He's not exactly not exactly the cleanest record, but we'll get into that another time.
They commissioned him to do an altarpiece for their church, where Philip Neri is buried, the Chiesa Nuova. And it's going to go on the right wall above an altar, and it's to show the entombment of Jesus. It's composed like no other painting before it. Usually entombments, no matter what you do in Renaissance painting, the way the viewer looks at things is he looks straight and then he looks up. This is kind of the gesture of viewing. In the case of Caravaggio's entombment, the way the movement works is his incredibly dramatic light comes up and hits a female figure in the upper right-hand corner. And from that little dot of light, your eye starts to go down. So the first thing he's making you do, think about it physically, you're bowing as you look at the painting. Then he puts this big, heavy, greenish, unwieldy body of Jesus that's just barely held up by his supporters. And then underneath it, he has a little piece of stone that seems to project into your space. So literally it's jutting in.
Coming to you.
And then underneath there's the altar with a blank space in the middle. And at that time, there were rules about painting. There actually were rules. And one was no blank spaces in painting. And yet Caravaggio not only leaves the blank space, but he has the hand of Jesus point to it. Like, hey, look, I left a blank space in the painting. That space, its function is filled when the priest celebrated Mass at the altar. When the priest stepped into that space, then that link between the body of Christ and the host was filled through the person of the priest in persona Christi. So you have this beautiful way of reinforcing in the mind of the faithful, this is the body of Christ. That's what art can do. You can explain transubstantiation till the cows come home, but when they see that,
it's an instant experience. It's a sensate experience, which Caravaggio kind of, the grittiness, the realism of it always kind of grabs you by the throat and pulls you in and you can't stop looking. The first time I saw it, I thought, this is like stagecraft. This is a scene. I mean, it's like a set. I hate to diminish it that way, but it practically is. It's a set for the Mass. It's a particular, a fantastic tableau, but what a scene. It's arresting when you see it in person.
Ironically, he was always accused of being too realistic, but you're absolutely right. You are right. He may have the gritty, dirty feet here. He may have something that looks a little realistic there, but the rest of it is completely staged.
Yeah, and beautiful. Tell me about I want to fast forward this to our own age. What can people get from this book? Why did you decide now was the time to write this? And then I have one last question. The idea of this book came to me in the lead up to 2017, which was the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation. And I kept noticing that the way people talk to each other about sacraments, the way we talk to each other about the faith, revealed a lot of confusion. So there's not like, this is in the Catholic Church. So this is how we follow teaching, this is how we follow teaching. There was a lot of chaos and confusion and tones that were starting to get really very polemical and uncharitable. And I was thinking to myself, when this first happened, there was a solution that the church came up with, which was to create works of art that would reinforce the faithful in what they had been taught. But mostly, if you think about it, when we look at a work, I take people on tours all the time, groups that don't know each other. And I think one of the most beautiful things is they may be different sides of the political spectrum, different sides of religious questions. But when we're looking at a work of art, we're all looking in the same direction. And so we're standing suddenly side by side before something we commonly agree on, which is beautiful. And so it was a way of kind of addressing these modern problems and saying that, once we could find solutions to talk to each other that didn't involve name calling and I'm never speaking to you again. No, it's unifying. Humanity is unifying. And I think true art pulls the best out of us. It reminds us of our humanity and the divinity that surrounds us if we're open to it. Now, here's the challenge. As I read the book and I finished the book, I was elated by it. I was always also a little depressed by it because, and here's why I was depressed, not because of anything in the book, but because of what I see in the world. You go out and you look at contemporary art. I will put some images up for your reflection. This is the contemporary church art. It's less than edifying. It's rarely beautiful, Liz, and it doesn't draw you in or pull you in. In fact, it repels in many ways. What lessons can we take from what you've unearthed and captured here? And might the lively arts, music, film, video, might that be part of whatever the next expression the church struggles to find or comes upon?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. There are plenty of, first of all, there's plenty of bad Catholic art, painting, sculpture, architecture. There's some dreadful architecture out there. It is true. There are a few little pockets of very beautiful artists who are doing very beautiful things. But you'll notice those pockets also, it's not just the artist. You require a very enlightened patron. You need someone who says, I'm building this church and I would like to have this architect and I would like to have that artist. And they're really thinking about about things. So there are things that are created that are beautiful. So that's the one hand of it. On the other hand, the production of all the bad art that I'm sure you'll find plenty of, it's created a rift between the public and art. The public doesn't really trust Catholic art anymore. Like, what are you going to? It feels like you're walking into a dentist's office.
Yeah.
What are you going to do to me today?
Felt banner and sprinkles of color with no purpose.
It's to the point where they roll their eyes into the back of their head, and like you don't even want to argue about it anymore. But you're right. There are plenty of other arts that still have an excellent chance of reaching the faithful. I think the faithful kind of shut down on painting and sculpture for the moment, but the fact is, there is, between music and literature and cinema, there are loads and loads and loads of possibility where you have a public that's willing to be informed, to be enlightened, to be inspired by these art forms. And then the fine arts, as we call them, will have to catch up.
Yeah, no, well, you see it, and you see it in pockets. I mean, the most vivid example would be Gibson's Passion of the Christ, which, as you know, took so many of the images from Caravaggio. He borrowed wholesale some of those moments, which I'm sure as you watched, you saw all the paintings flickering before your eyes. But and I can remember him poring over the sketches and the paintings, and he was trying to honor as well as advance his own image. But it seems we're going to have to take this legacy and run with it in some way. And for too long, Catholic art and art in general have ignored this. Maybe it's time for a comeback. We shall see.
I'm hoping for a revival.
Well, you're certainly a big part of it. Liz Lepp, thank you for being here. How Catholic Art Saved the Faith, The Triumph of Beauty, and the Truth in Counter-Reformation Art by Elizabeth Lev is available now in bookstores everywhere and online. After a nearly 200-year absence, Chant has returned to a small but historic monastery in the Umbrian hills of Italy. A group of Benedictine monks founded a community in the town of Norcia, the birthplace of Saint Benedict. They did so in 1998. Once again, sung prayers filled the Basilica of Saint Benedict. Now the monks, along with de Montfort music, are allowing the world to enter their monastery. They've released a new CD called Benedicta, Marian Chant from Norcia. I sat down earlier this week with the prior and founder of the Monks of Norcia, Father CASSIAN FOLSOM, to talk about the new CD, the importance of chant, and what it has meant to him personally. Father, tell me about the founding of this Benedictine community in 1998.
Well, I asked permission of my abbot in 1995. He was newly elected, and I thought for sure he would say no. And much to my surprise, he said yes. But it took 3 years for it actually to happen, and all sorts of obstacles, and so obviously it was the will of God, otherwise it wouldn't have happened.
Where were you before that? You were in a community, and you had a music background.
I do, of sorts. That is, my first year of college, I studied voice at Indiana University, at the music school there. But I transferred to the seminary in my second year, so it wasn't a very long training.
Well, it's a prestigious school, though.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And what of that did you take with you into your monastic life?
Well, the music background certainly, because in the seminary I was always a cantor. In the monastery I've been choir master at my home monastery of St. Meinrad. Also in founding the new community, I was the choir master for many years until a young monk would come along to take over I was always a cantor.
And how did you end up at Norcia, of all places?
Well, yes, it's the birthplace of St. Benedict, so it's important. And there hadn't been a monastery there for almost 200 years. That was divine providence too. We started in Rome, and the intention was to remain in Rome, this new monastery. But in the year 2000, the abbot primate had a heart attack and resigned, and he was the one who helped found us. And so we were open for new possibilities, and the Archbishop of Spoleto-Norcia requested that we transfer to Norcia. And of course there are many ups and downs in that process too.
Sure.
But we finally made it there at the end of the Jubilee year.
Wow. And that the Basilica of St. Benedict there, chant has been heard in those walls for
for
really
hundreds and hundreds of
1,000 years,
at least.
conservatively.
Yes.
What is it like to have been the founding member that really restored and brought this worship of God back to the monastery there?
Well, for many years, because the community was very small, we arrived in Norcia with 3 people, now we're 18.
Wow.
But we prayed in the crypt of the church, which is actually the birthplace of St. Benedict. And you could, perhaps it's silly to say so, but you could feel that those walls had been impregnated with prayer for centuries and centuries.
Wow.
But now, because we're too big, we've moved upstairs to the main church.
Is that where you all recorded Benedicta?
Yes, and the acoustics are splendid. So if it sounds good, it's hopefully because the monks sing well, but also because the acoustics.
Look, I was telling you before we started, I have a lot of chant in my collection at home. Many of them sound overproduced, almost like performances. This is something other. Why do you think it has a distinctive sound and a quality that people can't quite put their finger on, but they're drawn to it, no matter who they are, Catholic or otherwise?
Well, maybe for a couple of reasons. The monks believe what they're singing, so that's communicated. And they're young. And you can hear that in the voices too. My voice by now is old and tired, but we have young people who have beautiful color in their voices, and a couple of the monks have lots of musical background even before they came to the monastery. So that helps too.
Yeah, and you can hear that. Now, you all are known, if you're known for anything so far, for your beer.
I'm glad we're known for that.
And you've got this microbrewery that has become legendary. I know people here in the United States who make trips over to buy it. What is it about that beer? Who started this, and is that part of your ministry, your mission?
The beer is in the Trappist Belgian tradition. So we learned from the Trappist monks in Belgium. And they have century-old tradition of beer making. We were looking for a work that the community could do that would be income producing. So the original idea was we need to make a living.
Right.
But it has proved to be much more than that, because beer, good beer especially, is a bridge between the monks and the rest of the world. So even if people have no faith, if they like beer, then there's something that brings them to the monastery, and then we can start a conversation, and pretty soon they're talking about more serious things. And that has happened over and over and over again.
So they come for the beer, but they stay for the Mass and the chant and the rest of it.
Absolutely. It's a tool of evangelization.
What's the connection between the beer and the approach and appeal of that and this new CD in your mind? Is there a connection?
Well, they're both initiatives that the monks have made that are somewhat out of the ordinary. It shows a certain, that we're willing to take risks and we're willing to do new things, and there's lots of energy and activity, and this is, they're both expressions of that.
Yeah. Who chose this particular selection of music? These are Marian songs. These are antiphons and prayers. And this is something you do 8 times a day, we should say. This is not something you just did because the producers came into town. Right. In fact, I heard from one of your producers, you all would record and then you just keep going because it was that
time for prayer. Yeah. Right. Actually, the selections were made by 2 of the monks who have musical background. That is the present choir master, Father Basil, and the previous choir master, Brother Ignatius. And they did research on the history of these particular chant pieces, and Father Basil chose them with a view to highlighting different moments in the life of Mary. So it's organized in a kind of chronological way, starting from the Immaculate Conception to the crowning of Mary as Queen of Heaven.
It did not escape my ear or eye that you all say the extraordinary form of the Mass, the old rite. You hear this beautiful Latin sung on the CD. Is there a message here as well about sacrality and the connection to
these long-held traditions and the importance of maintaining them?
Yes. The old rite, or the liturgical tradition of the church, for us is a patrimony, not a museum piece, but something that's alive. And it draws young people. And because of the sacrality, that is, it's about God, it's not about us, you see. And that's powerful, and that draws people.
And they're drawn to what, do you think? You know, many people will say, and you read this all the time, oh, you've got that Baroque language and all those old vestments and the bells, and it goes on and on. That's a repellent to the young people. They do not want to see that.
Come and see. Check it out. It's not repellent to young people.
Well, your monastery is overflowing with young guys. What's the average age, 33?
33, in fact. I'm the old guy.
I have listened very closely over the last few days to the whole CD repeatedly. You are featured on a number at the beginning of some of these chants in solos.
I was part of the hoi polloi, that is the whole community in singing, but it's a great thing for me to pass on that role of solo singing to the younger monks.
Ab eterno ordinata sum, et ex antiquis antequam terra fieret, nondum erat abisi, et ego iam concepta erat.
Was this something important for you to do, to have it memorialized, to have it there?
We don't think about memorializing ourselves, really. It's just an expression of what we do that we wanted to share with our friends.
But it's heartfelt. I mean, there's something different here. And I think you hit upon it. This is the prayer that you all naturally do. This isn't a faked performance or something choreographed. And you all understand what you're singing, and that really comes through to the listener, I think.
That's great. That's really great.
Particularly your solo at the beginning. I think it's the second or third track. It's early on in the recording. You don't know where it is. I do. And there is something urgent there. I know you've been struggling recently with cancer. Has that changed the way you pray?
Well, that's a good question. I've had cancer twice, and thanks be to God, it's in remission. We say the dragon is sleeping, but it's a chronic disease. It can come back anytime. It changes the way I look at the world, certainly.
Sure.
I think more of the last things than I thought before. And much of our liturgical music is about the last things, you know. Right. So it gives you a perspective of divine realities that perhaps you need suffering in order to understand those things.
What would you say to those who are struggling? Some find such solace in this music, have found such peace in it. Is it a restorative for you as well?
Oh, absolutely. But I would put it in a more general sense, not just this CD, but in the Old Testament, you remember that Saul had these fits of madness from time to time.
Right.
And when he did so, David would play the harp for him and he would calm down. Well, if I go into Vespers, for example, kind of agitated and preoccupied about lots of things, by the time Vespers is over, with the waves of psalmody, then I've finally calmed down. And so it brings peace. Certainly, I experience that practically every day.
You've said that this is like breathing, and that there's so much pollution in the world, and that this is almost a curative. I've often thought, when I've heard communities in prayer, there is a vibration, a physical vibration that it gives off. I think evil has a vibration as well.
It's true.
Do you see this as a needed presence in the world, physically as well as otherwise?
We are desperately needy of these things. And I think monasteries can provide little oases of good sense and faith and beauty in a world that's gone mad.
what do you hope will be the reaction in the listener, no matter who picks this up?
Well, I think they would perceive the beauty of it. And beauty is a wonderful way of bringing
lure
people to God. That's one thing. The beauty and the peace of it. It's something peaceful. It can settle their agitated souls. So if beauty and peace can be the results, that's really wonderful.
Benedicta, Marian Chant from Norcia by the Benedictine Monks of Norcia is available now at music outlets everywhere. In 2009, my next guest quit her job as a clinic director for Planned Parenthood in Texas after observing an ultrasound during an abortion. Now, since then, she's become a leader in the pro-life movement and founder of And Then There Were None, a ministry helping abortion clinic workers to transition out of the industry. A decade later, her story is hitting the big screen. Her book about her journey, Unplanned, has been made into a movie set to be released this spring. Joining me now to discuss the film is Abby Johnson and the actress portraying her, ASHLEY BRATCHER. Ladies, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to start with you, Abby. I remember, it's been, I think, 9 years since we last talked about the book and your story. For those who might not know, what drew you to Planned Parenthood in the first place? What did you think you were doing when you came aboard that organization?
You know, I thought I was just there to help women. Didn't think I was there to sell abortion or promote abortion. I really believed the talking points that they had given me, that we were there to serve women, particularly low-income women, and that abortion was just something we did to keep women safe. It was sort of a necessary evil. And I learned that that was different through my years at Planned Parenthood, that we were actually selling abortion.
And you were there for 8 years.
8 years.
Wow. Now, tell us about that moment in 2009 when the lights came on for you.
Yeah.
What was that moment?
I was asked to come in and witness a live ultrasound-guided abortion procedure on a 13-week-old baby in the womb. And I watched in horror as this 13-week-old child was moving away from the abortion instruments, and it appeared that this baby was trying to fight and struggle to save his own life. And I knew then that there was humanity in the womb, and that abortion was taking an individual human being's life. And I knew that I was on the wrong side of this debate.
Wow. Ashley, how familiar were you with Abby's story when you first auditioned for this role?
I had no idea who Abby was. I'm so sorry. And when I got the audition and I read it, I thought maybe she continued working on at Planned Parenthood, that this was going to be a pro-choice film. It wasn't until after the audition that I was so compelled by what I read in the script that I looked up Abby. I saw her testimony online, and I was just shaken to the core. I was floored by what I'd heard, because I think, much like the general public, I didn't know what the actual abortion procedure entailed. And hearing her describe it, I was just crying on the floor.
Wow. When did you know you had the role?
The day that they sent me out to Oklahoma. I had auditioned weeks prior.
Where?
I taped myself in Atlanta and sent a tape in to the producer. Heard nothing at all. I felt in my spirit very strongly that I was meant to play this role. It wouldn't leave me. It was different than any other thing I had ever auditioned for, but still just silence, complete silence, until a couple of days before I got word from the producers that they wanted me to retape with a different direction, and they said, we'll let you know by Monday. Monday came and went, never heard anything. And I thought, okay, well, this isn't mine. I had a conversation with them Monday night, and I thought, okay, this is it, I've got it. And they said, just so you know, we've got one other person in the running that we're really considering, so we don't know if it's gonna be you yet. The next morning at 12 o'clock, 11:30, 12 o'clock, they call me and say, hey, can you get on a plane in 5 hours? get ready to film in Oklahoma for 7 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, okay, I guess nothing's impossible.
Yeah.
And I called my husband, made arrangements for my child to get picked up at the bus stop, and got on a plane to Oklahoma.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of pro-life, I guess, leaving the kid behind. That,
He was
that
in
might
good
be
care.
considered a little anti-life, but I'm not going to dwell on that part of the story. Abby, I want to get back to, I'm coming back to you, though. This is a very interesting through line here
Oh, yeah.
in your personal life that I think people
Absolutely.
might want to hear about. Abby, there was a New York Times piece recently about the mistreatment of pregnant women who work at Planned Parenthood clinics. Now, you were pregnant when you were working at
I
Planned
was.
Parenthood.
I'm always pregnant.
How were you? This is, you're witnessing life all the time. Tell me, how were you treated? And was it discouraged to have children and to be pregnant at Planned Parenthood?
Yes, it
When
was
you worked there?
absolutely discouraged. I actually talked to the New York Times reporters, and they asked me, can you tell us anybody else who had a baby during your 8 years working at Planned Parenthood inside of your affiliate? And there was no one. I was the only person in 8 years who had a child. Now, I was not the only person that got pregnant. There were many of my coworkers that got pregnant, but when you work at Planned Parenthood, they offer you free abortions if you get pregnant. And so my coworkers had taken advantage of that perk and had abortions. I was encouraged almost daily during my pregnancy to have an abortion with my daughter. And I remember being so thankful when I finally hit 24 weeks, because at that time abortion was illegal after 24 weeks in Texas. And I thought, okay, finally the comments will stop.
I want to read you something. Dr. Leanna Wen is the new president of Planned Parenthood, who's been going around the country speaking about women's health care and that the organization provides that primarily. A recent headline from BuzzFeed entitled, "Planned Parenthood's New President Wants to Focus on Non-Abortion Health Care," caused Wen to tweet out the following. She said, "I am always happy to do interviews, but these headlines completely misconstrue my vision for Planned Parenthood. Our core mission is providing, protecting, and expanding access to abortion and reproductive health care." Now, she's clearly saying there that's the business model. Now, Planned Parenthood has long said that's not how they make their money, Abby. Your thoughts?
You know, I remember a few years ago when Trump took office, he told Cecile Richards, their previous president, if you guys will stop doing abortions, we will stop trying to defund you. If you really want to focus on women's health care, focus on women's health care,
Right.
Get rid of the abortions, we'll keep funding you. And I remember her Twitter response. She said, she said, at Planned Parenthood, abortions are as critical as cancer screening pap smears. And I thought, well, there you go. All of us who have worked at Planned Parenthood, we can attest to that. We can say, yes, that's absolutely their business model. I was encouraged, along with many others, to increase our abortion quota, to double our abortion quota. So we've known for a long time that this is about abortion. Honestly, I'm glad that they're just being honest about it, and that they're now not trying to hide behind the fact that they're a women's healthcare organization. Let's put it out like it is. Their highest revenue generating product, abortion.
Yeah, they claim it's 3% of
Sure.
their income. Now, I want to play a clip from the movie that actually speaks to this. This is from the movie Unplanned. Watch.
Abby, let me explain something to you. Fast food outlets look to break even on the hamburgers they sell. That's all they do, is break even. Do you know how they make their money?
No.
On the French fries and the soda, the low-cost, high-margin items.
Cheryl, I'm sorry, but I don't understand.
Abortion is our fries and soda.
But we're a nonprofit organization.
Nonprofit is a tax status, not a business model.
Did this happen this way, this exchange about fast food? Or is this dramatic license?
We did have a conversation similar to this about abortion being our low cost, high revenue. And the
Right.
line where she says, I said, but we're a nonprofit. And she says, nonprofit is a tax status, not a business status.
Oh, boy. How involved were you in the shaping of this script? Were you on set also?
I was on set,
Yeah.
and they sent me the script and said, tell us what you think, like fingers crossed. And really there were only a few minor things. They did such a good job at really sticking to the book, Unplanned, and the then subsequent writings, you know, through articles and things.
Right.
So
and
there really
interviews.
wasn't a lot that I had to say, I don't like that. I mean, they.
I want to talk to you for a moment, Ashley. Was there any hesitation about accepting this role?
None whatsoever.
Given the subject matter, and that there are people who will go, you know what, this crosses the line for us.
No hesitation whatsoever. As soon as I saw Abby's testimony, I was compelled. I knew that this was a topic that we needed to discuss, and I wanted this film to be a conversation starter. Because when someone makes a complete 180 in their life, someone who is so pro-choice, such a women's advocate, and all of a sudden steps away from it, you have to stop and wonder why. So no matter where you stand on the issue, I think that this is a movie for everyone, because you will be touched by her story no matter what you believe.
Yeah, and this story actually touched you in a way you didn't expect. Tell people what happened. I mean, once you started sharing the storyline here with your family, you learned something.
Right. I left so fast for Oklahoma that I didn't have time to tell everyone where I was. My husband and my sister knew, and my son, obviously.
Yeah, your son's at the bus stop now, still waiting for you to pick him up, but go ahead.
He was in good hands.
Yeah, we're sending cups for him.
So my mother called me on the 4th day that I had arrived for production. And I'm sitting in a salon getting my hair colored red, and I take the phone call because I need to let my mom know where I am. I mean, proper etiquette, right? And my mother had shared with me when she was younger, she had had an abortion in high school. And she mentioned that when she got pregnant with me when she was 19, that she had considered aborting, but that was not an option. She could never do that again. And that was the only conversation we ever had about it. It was very nonchalant. So when I went to explain Abby's story to her and let her know the role that I was playing, I was very careful because I didn't want her to feel judged. I didn't want to upset her in any way. And as I proceeded to explain everything within the story, she completely broke down. I could hear her uncontrollably weeping through the phone. And she said to me, I need to tell you something that you never knew before. When I was pregnant with you, I was actually at the clinic. My name had been called. I had just been examined by a very pregnant nurse. And I was laying on the clinic table when I got very sick, and I decided that I couldn't go through with it. And I decided to get up and walk out, and I chose you. And I never knew that before accepting this role. And I think I get so emotional every time I tell the story, because for me, I just sit in awe that God cares for us so personally that He would plan our steps from conception, that I would stand and be able to tell Abby's story, never having known my own story. You know, at some point, I think I'll start carrying tissues, but every time I tell the story, I think, oh, I'm not going to cry this time because I've told it a million times. But it never gets any easier to look at your life and examine all the experiences you've had and the relationships you've built and think that it almost never happened.
No, it's amazing. Stories, this is why stories are so important. And to share those stories, whether they're our own or other people's, I think it connects us and it helps us make sense of our world and allows us the freedom to talk about these other stories. Your father also confirmed, I know the story for you.
Yes. So my parents divorced when I was in college, and I called my father afterwards to have a conversation with him because I told my mom, I said, I just need some time to process this. And when I called him, he confirmed every detail. And I said, Dad, how is it that all these years no one ever told me? And he said, how do you tell your daughter that you intended to abort her? That never seems like an appropriate time to have that conversation. But he also confirmed that they were very young. They thought that this was their only solution, but they didn't have enough money for the abortion. So in order to pay for the abortion, my father pawned a family heirloom, which happened to be a shotgun. And that was another thing that just blew me away, that we view human life so cheap that it's the equivalent to a pawned shotgun, of all things. The beautiful part of that story is, though, that when my mom left that clinic, she used that money to buy maternity clothes and a crib and to prepare for me.
Wow, beautiful. Abby, what did you think when you heard this story? I mean, this had to give you, I mean, you hear a lot of these stories in your ministry, which we're going to get to in a second. But what did you think when you heard this?
You know, the first time that Ashley and I spoke on the phone, I felt a real connection to her, you know, which I had really prayed that I would, because I thought, oh, I want to like the actress.
Like this would be awkward.
That would be weird. So I really prayed for that, and I loved her instantly. And I remember thinking, this is the person that God has planned to play this part. And then when she told me the story, I thought, oh my gosh, it was just further confirmation that her life was saved so that she can help show our culture and our society what we are doing to our unborn brothers and sisters. And what a great gift that God has given her in this role, not just because it's about my story, but it's truly God's story. And he is using her in such a mighty and powerful way. And it's really beautiful and very touching.
I'll say, amazing how art and reality start intertwining and used for a higher purpose. Give me a sense, Abby, when you were last here, were you Catholic yet?
No.
When did you come into the church?
April of 2012.
Wow. And what was that process? What drew you there?
Well, when I first became pro-life, all of my new friends were Catholic. And so we were looking for a new church because the Episcopal Church where we had been going fired us. They said, you're pro-life, you can no longer be here, which was fine because I didn't want to go there anyway. But I sort of wanted to fire them. But anyway, and so we were looking for a new congregation, and all of our Catholic friends were really saying, you should come to Mass, you should come. And Doug and I had sort of grown up with some anti-Catholic sentiments, right, in our Protestant churches that we grew up in. And so we were like, ugh, no, we're not doing that. So one Sunday we said, look, let's just go to Mass. We'll go, we'll tell them we hated it, and then they'll stop bothering us. I mean, really, that's sort of what we thought. And
that never worked, you know.
it didn't work.
It never worked.
It didn't work, Raymond.
I try to do that when people send me books and films. I didn't like. They keep coming at you. But go on.
So
taking
we
you
go.
off the
So my
path.
husband and I, we go to Mass, and we're sitting there, and I just remember walking away, and we both were sitting in the car, and we were just like, that felt right. Something about that felt, and it was shocking to us because we didn't think anything about the Catholic Church was right. But here we are, and it felt like home. And as soon as I told one of my new Catholic friends this, we were suddenly sitting in RCIA. and honestly, though, the more we learned about the church, the more we learned about this beautiful, rich faith, the more we realized that was home. And so my husband and I actually came in to the church together, which was such a blessing. And we had our marriage convalidated. And so, it's been beautiful.
Now, tell me, as part of your work, you have brought 400 former Planned Parenthood clinic workers out of Planned Parenthood. What do they tell you? What's the fear? And why do they have to come to you for help to get out? I mean, it's a job. Can't they just leave?
Yeah. You know, it's not like working at some fast food restaurant. Number one, the spiritual warfare, intense.
I'll bet.
Even when they start deciding, maybe this isn't what I want to do anymore, the spiritual warfare starts coming at them. So there's that. But they are told that if you ever leave us, if you ever start talking about what you've seen here, we're going to take you to court.
Oh, boy.
You can never talk about what has happened here.
Sounds like a cult.
It is. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. And you're really brainwashed while you work there. And they also tell these workers, if you leave, we will give you a bad reference. You will not be able to get another job. And so the fear is, number one, of course, lack of income, right? A lot of the workers that we have helped are single parents. So they're working 50, 60 hours a week at the clinic. So, you know, how do you leave your job? How do you find another job when you're working that many hours? But the second thing is just fear of retaliation from the abortion industry. And so they have a team of us you know, who can surround them and support them. And we have access to business owners, managers, and we can say, hey, are you willing to give this gal a shot?
Right.
And that makes all the difference. It makes them feel empowered enough to take that first step.
Before I let you all go, Ashley, I'll start with you. What do you want people to come away after seeing Unplanned? What do you want them to see, understand, and feel?
The first thing I'd like for people to recognize is an undeniable revelation that there is life within the womb, but also to understand that there is grace, there is hope, there is forgiveness. This is a story of redemption, that you've never gone too far, that you have outreached the Father's hand, that there you can always come back. And there's also a beautiful love story here. Doug loves Abby unconditionally, and I think he really exhibits the love of Jesus in a marriage. So it's a beautiful story of hope and definitely a conversation starter.
Mm-hmm. Powerful piece. What did you think when you first saw it? It's got to be surreal watching your life unfold on the screen and a dramatic moment in your life.
It was weird. Yeah, it's still weird.
Yeah.
I've seen it a bunch of times. It's still weird. The first time I watched it, I kept thinking to myself, I kept reminding myself, I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for God. Because it's difficult to watch the most challenging, the most sinful moments of your life played out on a screen for the public to see. But I just had to keep reminding myself that this is for God. This is for His glory. And if the expose of my sin will cause one person to turn to Him or turn back to Him, then it's worth it.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you both for being here and for your beautiful stories and witness. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Help hone your kids' reading skills this summer. The Will Wilder series, including Will Wilder 3, The Amulet of Power, is available everywhere. Makes for a great family adventure. Go out and grab a copy, or you can listen to the audio books. I do all the funny voices, and makes those summer drives go by a little faster. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, you can follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.